Good afternoon, bee people. Welcome back to the apiary. We're going to be talking about swarm traps today and why bees swarm and what you need to do as a beekeeper to ensure that you have the right preventative measures to try to capture that swarm should you not be there to catch it or see it happen or prevent it. You know, beekeeping is definitely an art, and it's something you have to learn and watch, but the bees and learn from them and such. But the real thing with beekeeping this time of year is swarming. You know, coming out of winter, we have our colonies. They're growing really fast. Those overwinter queens are starting to lay. We see a lot of capped brood within our bee colonies, and we want to make sure that if they get too big too fast, they don't decide to swarm out. A lot of bee colonies that are overwintered, 2- and 3-year queens, they have a more propensity to swarm or create that pheromone within the colony to swarm because maybe they feel that their size is going to get too big, too fast, and the cavity or the place where they're living, the colony or the hive, is not big enough. A lot of times over the winter you have, you know, a lot of empty space, but you also have a lot of removed supers. You don't have the honey supers on, so they're coming out of winter and they're making that determination whether that's a place for them to continue growing as they come into the spring nectar flow and spring months. At the end of March, going into April here on the eastern shore of Maryland, and swarming is something we want to manage and make sure that we're out ahead of. What causes a swarm, as I just mentioned, it's really just the density of the population within the hive, right? So the cavity of the tree or the place where they are at, the bees tend to, you know, create that swarming practice when the quantity of bees start to push in the density, higher density within that hive box that you have. So, you know, really the things you can do to manage swarming so it doesn't happen is to ensure that you're managing that density, keeping an eye every 7 to 10 days on your colony, making sure that a lot of the bees don't jam up inside that box and fill it too fast where you don't have the space for them to grow. What ends up happening is once they determine that they need to go on that swarming path, they will start to build queen cells. Queen cells are just a way for the colony to naturally split. Swarming is really just a natural occurrence with honeybees. It's really just a method in which a colony will naturally split the colony size. The genetics will be passed on to another generation. The original queen will swarm out with about 60% or so of the colony of bees and sort of a flurry. And we've got videos online that shows us swarms either happening or we're managing earlier last year. So take a look at our YouTube channel for those videos. We're not going to show you that today, but swarming is definitely an amazing occurrence. It's a natural occurrence. But if you're a beekeeper, especially a hobby beekeeper, you have to be careful, because if you your hive swarms out right at the height or the peak of the nectar flow, it's going to be hard for them to get going again and build back fast enough to get enough foragers and such to bring in that nectar flow. So managing the swarming early is perfect, is the right strategy. You know, keeping an eye out on any building of queen cells within your frames. Those swarm cells, the queen cells that usually appear towards the bottom of the frame. If this is a frame of inside your colony and you start to see more peanut-sized shells or cups that are being put on the bottom of the frame and not the normal cell that you would see in a frame, that could be an indication of a queen cell. You look for an egg or a larva in that, and they've already started that process. So if you do see that, you know, there's a couple things you can do. We won't talk about that in this video. We're going to talk mainly about setting your swarm traps, but I'll do another video on inspecting frames and determining the different types of queen cells where they will appear and what you should do in that case. For this video, we're going to talk about just swarm traps and setting them up. You want to have, if you have, you know, one colony, you could probably set a swarm trap up or an empty box nearby and have it baited. But if you have more than 2 colonies or even 3 colonies within your apiary, you make sure you want to have at least one swarm trap within, you know, 15 to 20 yards. We have a yard back here behind the barn that has about 10 or 20 colonies in it, and we have a yard here in the front that has about 10 or 20 colonies in it coming out of winter. So we've got a lot of colonies here that we're managing. We know we're going to grow this year, but we want to make sure that we can catch those bees that may decide to naturally split, that we don't get in front of and either do the preventative measures with the queen cells and managing that, or giving them enough space to grow into. So anything that happens in the time where we miss that, or if they want to abscond, you know, sometimes bees will just abscond as well and want to leave all the bees with the same queen. And this will help the scout bees have a place or find a place to move into. It's not a guaranteed foolproof way, but it's a way you can help try to catch those swarms as they come out. There are also different types of swarms. You'll see the swarms that you see in the early stages where they've balled up on a tree. Those you'll see in your neighborhoods or in your areas, your community. If you do see those this year, please reach out to a beekeeper such as myself. We'll come and rescue those swarms because they're looking for a home. And what we don't want is for that colony of bees, that, you know, several thousand bees, to find a new home in the eave of your house or the wall of a home or structure. And that makes it much more difficult to get those bees out. It requires a cutout. It's more expensive. Whereas if you have a swarm of bees on a branch, we can come and get those pretty quickly, and there's no charge to you. We don't charge for that service. But here in the apiary, we're going to talk more about the swarm trap today. This box is actually built by neighbor Nate's Bees down in Lower Delaware. Nate's been a beekeeper with me for several years, and he built a bunch of these boxes for me. So we've had this in this location last year. If you look back at some of our videos, and it worked well. We caught 2 swarms in it. So it's a good box. It's a good location. It's in between both of our yards. It's about 15 to 20 yards away from or more from the hives. It's, you know, it's up off the ground. It's a good place to actually put a swarm trap, just to kind of catch those swarming bees should they do happen to have that process. How do you set this up? When you look at a swarm box, you'll notice the size of it. It is basically a medium box turned on its end. You know, you can use a deep box or a medium box, but the size of it is key. You'll notice that it's much bigger than a traditional frame. So when we hang frames in there, there's a lot of empty space down here on the bottom. And we're only going to put 3 frames in here. The reason for that is that you want to have frames of old comb that attracts the bees. The smell that comes from the wax and the prior bees being on it will attract those bees. We're also going to bait it as well. And we'll show you what we're going to do there. You want to have an entrance that you can open and close once they're kind of nested up in here and they swarm in here. There's a nail in between that we put just to keep any birds or small birds from creating a bird's box out of this. It's really just we want to attract the bees, not the birds. So when setting this up, I mentioned you want to use old comb. These are a few frames of comb that we have from colonies that either didn't make it through the winter. They're just old comb that has that smell of the bees, the wax. There is no honey or nectar on these frames. You want to make sure that the frames are empty. There are some pieces of pollen which are fine, but I would steer and encourage to not have or to discourage frames with honey on it. It will just attract pests and other things you don't want within that box. This box will be up for a period of several weeks. We'll check it as well, making sure that the baiting we put in it is strong enough. So how do you set these up? We've got 3 frames. We're going to use some plastico frames and 1 frame that has some old comb on it. It's in a wood frame. I'd recommend using the plastic frames if possible, just if you do happen to get any types of wax moths or anything that will get inside here. Because there is no active bee colony to maintain the colony, the wax frames tend to be a little bit more of a defense to the wax moths, or the plastic frames will be a better defense against the wax moths. But we're still going to put this other frame in here. It's an older frame. We don't really care about it, but we're going to use it because it does have the scent of the old bees that are in it. The way this will work is we're going to take these frames, we're going to put it inside this hollow box. There's nothing else inside of it. And we're going to just put those frames up against the back of the box so that they're in there. And it creates a cavity. If the frames that are in here, there's a big open space down here on the bottom. And what that will do is it'll give the perception of an open cavity to these bees. It'll still have the smell of the wax combs and the bait that we're going to put in here, but it will also allow for the bees to have feel like when they're coming in, the scout bees, this is a large enough cavity to move into. So that's what we'll do there. So how do we bait this? I keep saying bait the colony. We're going to do something that we used last year that was really well. We used the Swarm Commander products. This is a Swarm Commander lure that you see, and we're using this product. It's really just a hanging lure. It's called a super lure. It has the scent of lemongrass oil on it. So it's impregnated in the actual lure that's going to hang in there, and that will also attract the bees as well when we put this in. I cut it in half because I used half of it last year, stored it, and now I'm going to use the other half this year. In a box this size, you don't need to put a full lure in here, just half of it will be fine. We're going to take this lure, and one of the things, it is very, very strong, so one of the things that we want to be able to do is put this in, and I'm going to actually take some of the lure just for a second and rub it on the entrance, just to have a little bit of the scent, and then I'm going to take the lure and I'm going to put it down to the back bottom of the swarm trap. Okay, you can definitely smell, just even right now on my fingers, the scent of the lemongrass oil. It mimics the pheromone of a queen, so when a scout bee comes in, they'll look and smell this and be attracted to this versus, you know, some other place that has a cavity. Again, my hole is going to be open, and then we're going to put our lid on top, and then when we set for the winter, or set for the swarm trap, here's our lid. We're going to go ahead and close it up, and it's good to go. So that's how we set up swarm traps here at Beekeeping Apiary. You want to make sure you put a couple of these in and around your community. Hopefully you heard me on the video. It got a little windy here pretty quick, so maybe a little hard to hear me, but that's how we set these up. If you have any questions, comment below. If you have any techniques that work for you, definitely if you can get them up a little higher, maybe up 6-8 feet, but definitely also as well in a tree. But this spot is where we're putting this one. It's worked well for us in the previous years. Hopefully you learned a little bit more about swarming, and it helped you out when you set your swarm traps this spring. So good luck. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Follow us on Facebook and all the other social media platforms as we continue to learn this year at the Beekeeping Apiary, where beekeeping is definitely more than a hobby. It's an obsession. Thanks for watching.